The rain wasn't just falling. It was a solid, unforgiving sheet of gray, turning the winding country road into a slick black ribbon. Nia kept her hands steady on the leather-wrapped wheel of the BMW, her knuckles a shade lighter than the rest of her dark skin. The wipers swept a frantic, rhythmic beat against the deluge, a metronome counting down to something she couldn't name. In the rearview mirror, Kwon Jin-woo was a sculpture of stillness and shadow. He hadn't spoken in an hour, his gaze fixed on the dissolving landscape outside his window. She had been his driver for 3 months. 3 months of ferrying the most quietly dangerous man in Seoul's underworld from one glass tower to another, from hushed restaurants with private rooms to warehouses that smelled of steel and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. She was a graduate student in urban planning, buried in debt, and the pay was too good to question. The job description had been simple: discretion, precision, and a clean driving record. She had all three. She also had a past she never listed on any application. A past that taught her the difference between the sound of rain on a car roof and the sound of tires on wet asphalt when they aren't supposed to be there. She heard it now. A low hum, gaining on them too fast for this kind of road, in this kind of weather. Her eyes flicked to the mirror again. 2 sets of headlights, perfectly spaced, slicing through the downpour. They were black sedans, sleek and predatory, just like their own. Not police. Not civilians. This was business. Her father's first rule echoed in her mind, a ghost at her ear. Never let them box you in. The moment you're stationary, you're dead. Mr. Kwon, she said, her voice impossibly calm. We have company. He didn't look back. His eyes met hers in the mirror. They were dark, flat, and held a terrifying lack of surprise. It was the calm of a man who had been expecting this storm, just not on this particular day. How close? Closing. They'll try to block the next turn, she knew the playbook. It was a universal language written in horsepower and steel. Can you lose them? The question was clipped, stripped of all emotion. It wasn't a plea, it was an assessment of her capabilities. Nia's grip tightened on the wheel. The beige dress she wore, chosen for its professional modesty, felt thin and useless, a paper doll outfit in a world of wolves. Not on this road.
No exits.
Too narrow. As if summoned by her words, a third car, a heavy black SUV, pulled from a hidden dirt track ahead, blocking the road completely. Its headlights flared, blinding her.
Boxed in.
The cardinal sin. Her father would be ashamed. The 2 sedans behind them screeched to a halt, pinning them in place. The silence inside the BMW was suddenly immense, a vacuum sealed against the roar of the rain. The only sound was the click of Jin-woo's seatbelt being unfastened.
Get out, he said.
Men were spilling from the other cars, clad in dark suits that were already soaked through. They held firearms with a practiced ease that made Nia's stomach clench. They weren't aiming to talk. The passenger side, Jin-woo commanded, his voice a low thrum of authority. He was already moving, his long frame unfolding from the back seat. Stay behind me. Nia didn't hesitate. She unbuckled, her movements fluid, economical. Panic was a luxury. Her body remembered drills her mind had tried to forget. Low, fast, use the vehicle for cover. The passenger door opened and a hand, strong and unforgiving, wrapped around her upper arm, pulling her out into the roaring dark. The cold was a physical blow. Rain plastered her dress to her skin instantly. Jin-woo was a solid wall of warmth and tailored wool in front of her. He pulled a compact, matte black pistol from inside his jacket. The movement was so smooth it was almost invisible, a magic trick of violence.
He didn't look at it.
His eyes were scanning the tree line, the ditch, the tactical layout of their new prison. This way, he bit out, pulling her toward the dense woods that bordered the road. A shout cut through the storm. Then a gunshot, a sharp crack that was swallowed by the deluge. Jin-woo didn't flinch. He just pulled her harder, his grip bruising. They scrambled down the slick embankment, mud sucking at her inappropriate shoes. Another shot whizzed past, close enough for her to hear the hornet's buzz of its passage. That was the moment everything changed. He was pulling her, Yes, but she was the one whose feet found purchase on a submerged rock. She was the one who saw the narrow game trail half hidden by ferns, a path invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years learning how to look for escape routes. No, she said, her voice sharp. She yanked her arm free from his grip. For a split second, Jinwoo's expression flickered. Not with anger, but with stark surprise. No one pulled away from him. They'll expect us to follow the ditch, she said, shouting to be heard over the rain. They'll have men sweeping it.
This way.
Through the trees. It's thicker cover. He stared at her, the rain dripping from his perfectly cut black hair, his dark eyes searching hers for a something.
Deception. Hysteria.
He found neither. What he saw was a certainty that matched his own. Without a word, he nodded, a sharp, decisive dip of his chin. He gestured with his weapon. She took the lead. They plunged into the dripping, grasping darkness of the forest. Branches whipped at her face, and thorns tore at the fabric of her dress. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady roar of the rain. But her mind was cold.
Clear.
This was a different kind of driving. She was navigating a landscape of fear, and every instinct her father had beaten into her was firing at once. Move quiet. Don't break branches. Use the sound of the storm as cover. Behind her, Jinwoo moved with a predator's grace, silent and lethal. He was a creature of concrete jungles, of boardrooms and back alleys, but here, in the raw wilderness, he adapted. He trusted her lead without question. That, more than anything, sent a shiver of a different kind of fear through her. Trust in his world was a currency paid for in blood and loyalty. She had, in the space of 3 minutes, earned a measure of it she had no right to. They ran for what felt like an eternity, the forest an endless, suffocating maze. Nia's lungs burned, and her legs ached, but she pushed on, driven by a primal need to put distance between them and the clean, efficient violence on that road. She could feel Jinwoo's presence behind her, a steady, dangerous heat. He never flagged, never made a sound. He was a machine built for survival. Finally, she spotted a rock outcropping, a shallow overhang that offered meager shelter from the relentless downpour. It wasn't much, but it was a place to stop, to think. Here, she gasped, ducking under the ledge. The relative quiet was deafening. The roar of the rain was now a muffled drumming on the stone above them. Jinwoo followed, folding his large frame into the cramped space. He stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the ozone from the rain in his clothes, mixed with the faint, expensive scent of cedar and something else. Something like cold iron. He holstered his weapon and leaned against the rock wall, his chest rising and falling in a steady, controlled rhythm. He wasn't even out of breath. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. His gaze wasn't on her torn dress or the scratches on her arms. It was on her face, in her eyes. It was an appraising look, the kind a master craftsman gives a tool that is performed in an unexpected and impressive way. "You know how to run," he stated. It was not a question. Nia hugged her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the bone-deep chill. "My father taught me a few things." "Your father is a professor of urban planning?" Jinwoo asked, a ghost of irony in his voice. He knew her file. Of course he did. He knew her grades, her address, her lack of any living family. He knew the official story. "He was a driver," she said, the words tasting like rust in her mouth. "In Chicago. For a different kind of family." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. The temperature in their small shelter seemed to drop several degrees. He now saw the full picture. The quiet, overqualified student wasn't just a good driver. She was fluent in a language he thought he alone spoke. Who was he? Jinwoo's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a command. His name was Marcus Thorne. He drove for the O'Malley Syndicate for 20 years, she said the name, and watched it land. Even here, thousands of miles away, in a Korean forest, that name held weight. Jinwoo's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened, a flicker of cold calculation. He knew the name. The O'Malleys were old power, a different empire, but their reputation was known. "He's dead," Jin-woo said. Another statement. Nia nodded, looking away from his penetrating gaze. 5 years ago. A setup. Not unlike this 1-inch. That was when she saw it. For a fraction of a second, the mask of cold control slipped. A shadow moved behind his eyes, a deep, ancient pain. It was the echo of a wound, raw and exposed. He looked away from her, out at the curtain of rain, his jaw tightening until a muscle bunched. "My brother," he said, his voice a low rasp. "It was a road just like this one. I was supposed to be in the car behind him. I was late." He didn't need to say more. The story was there in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the bleak finality of his tone. He had failed to protect someone. A betrayal by blood, or by the clock. It was the ghost that haunted him, the failure that drove his relentless pursuit of control. And tonight it had almost happened again. He had almost lost control. He had almost gotten them killed. Nia felt a strange, unwelcome pang of empathy. This man was a killer, a crime lord who dealt in fear and violence. But in that moment, he was also just a man, haunted by a ghost she understood all too well. "They'll be searching in a grid pattern," she said, forcing her voice back to the practical, the tactical. "They know the area better than we do. We can't stay here." He turned back to her, the mask firmly back in place. But something had shifted between them. The carefully defined lines of employer and employee had been washed away by the rain and the gunfire. "You have a plan, Miss Thorne?" he asked, and the way he said her name was different. It was weighted, deliberate. She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. She had run from this life once. She had built a new identity, a new future, on the ashes of her father's world. But that world had found her. And now, survival meant running back toward it. "I might," she said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." He gave a short, humorless smile. "Try me. There's a place, about 5 miles east of here. An old farm. It's off any map you'd have," she explained. "It belongs to a man my father used to know. An independent. He brokers information, provides sanctuary. For a price." "And you think this man can be trusted?" "He can't be," Nia said bluntly. "He trusts only money and his own skin, which makes him predictable. He'll help us because he knows who my father was and because he knows who you are. Helping you will be worth more to him than selling you out. At least for tonight."
It was a risk.
A massive one. They would be walking into a different kind of trap, trading one set of enemies for a den of snakes. She could have kept this information to herself. She could have focused only on her own escape. In the chaos, she could have disappeared. The thought was a tempting whisper. She could be free of him, of this. But she looked at him, at the rain slicking his dark hair, at the resolute set of his jaw, and she knew she wouldn't. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't fear. It was something else. A flicker of recognition. She saw the same survivor's instinct in him that her father had carried like a second skin. To abandon him now felt like abandoning a part of herself. It was a choice. Her choice. "Lead the way," Jin-woo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He was placing his life, the fate of his entire organization, in the hands of his driver. The trek to the farm was a brutal, silent ordeal. The rain finally eased to a miserable drizzle, but the cold had settled deep into their bones. Nia moved with a grim purpose, navigating by the feel of the land, the slope of the ground, the faint differences in the darkness of the trees. Twice, they froze as the distant sound of engines and muffled shouts carried on the wind. They were being hunted. They finally emerged from the woods at the edge of a fallow field. In the distance, a single, dim yellow light burned in the window of a dilapidated farmhouse. It looked abandoned, but Nia knew better. This was the place. As they approached, a deep bark echoed from the house. "He has dogs," Jin-woo stated, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "2 of them. Rottweilers. They're for show," Nia said quietly. "The Real security is the man himself." She walked up to the sagging porch and knocked a specific rhythm on the weathered door. Knock, knock.
Pause.
Knock.
Pause.
Knock, knock. Her father's code. After a long moment, the door creaked open a few inches. A pair of shrewd, suspicious eyes peered out. An old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, stood there holding a shotgun. "What do you want?" he growled in perfect, unaccented English. "I'm Marcus Thorne's daughter," Nia said, her voice steady. "We need a place until morning." The old man's eyes widened slightly. He looked from her to the tall, imposing figure of Jinwoo standing behind her, dripping water onto his porch. He recognized power when he saw it. He also recognized an opportunity. "The price for sanctuary has gone up," he said, his eyes glinting. "He'll pay it," Nia answered for him. The old man, Choi, let them in. The farmhouse was sparse but clean, smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. He led them to a back room with a cot and a single chair. He brought them dry clothes, a worn flannel shirt and work pants for Nia, and clothes for Jinwoo that were laughably too small but were at least dry. He also brought a rudimentary first aid kit. "You're bleeding," Jinwoo said, his voice flat. Nia looked down. A long, deep gash ran along her forearm, a gift from a thorny branch she hadn't seen in the dark. She hadn't even felt it. "It's nothing," she said, but the room tilted slightly. Adrenaline was a fickle friend. Before she could react, he took the kit from her. He gestured to the cot.
"Seat."
It was a command. She obeyed, her body suddenly feeling heavy and exhausted. He knelt in front of her, his movements precise and economical. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, his touch surprisingly gentle. His focus was absolute, as if this small task was the most important negotiation of his life. Nia watched his dark head bent over her arm, the way his long fingers worked with practiced efficiency. He was so close she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the single, thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow. She noticed things she did not want to notice. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the events of the night, with the unspoken knowledge that they had crossed a threshold. She was no longer just the driver. She was the woman who knew his secrets, who had seen his vulnerability, who had saved his life. He finished wrapping the bandage, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second on her skin. A spark of heat, sharp and unexpected, shot up her arm. She flinched. He looked up, his dark eyes locking with hers. The air grew thick, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the men hunting them. "You did not have to bring me here," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You could have disappeared. Why didn't you?" She told herself it was survival instinct, that her chances were better with him than alone. But she knew it was a lie. "I don't run from a fight I can win," she said, echoing another one of her father's lessons. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "You believe we can win this?" "I know the man who betrayed you made one mistake," she said. "He left you alive. And he left you with me." That was the moment one of them almost lost the other. A floorboard creaked in the main room. Instantly, Jinwoo was on his feet, his gun in his hand, pushing Nia behind him. He moved like the room owed him space. The door to their room burst open and Choi stood there, his face pale with fear. "They're here," the old man stammered. "They offered me more than you can pay." Behind him, two armed men stepped into the doorway. They were the same men from the road. Professionals. Their guns were raised. The trap had closed. But Nia had crossed a line she could not uncross. She had brought them here, knowing the old man was a snake. She had counted on it. While Jinwoo was tending to her arm, she had slipped her phone from the pocket of her wet dress. Under the cover of the cot, she had sent a single, coded text message. A message to the only other contact her father had left her. A man who owed her father his life. A man who hated the organization hunting Jinwoo even more than Jinwoo did. "You should have taken the first offer, Choi," she said, her voice ringing with cold authority. The men in the doorway looked at her, confused. Jinwoo glanced back, a question in his eyes. From outside, the night exploded. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the back of the house. The two men in the doorway spun around, caught completely by surprise. In that split second of distraction, Jin-woo moved. He was a blur of motion, 2 precise shots, and the men crumpled to the floor. It was surgical. It was lethal. He turned to look at Nia, his face a mask of cold fury, and something else, something that looked like awe. "Who did you call?"
An old debt, she said simply.
The war for his empire had just come to his doorstep. But the enemy had made a fatal error. They had targeted him. And in doing so, they had targeted her. That made it personal. The firefight outside was short and brutal. By the time it was over, Jin-woo's unseen allies had melted back into the night, their debt repaid. Choi was cowering in a corner, his gamble having failed spectacularly. Jin-woo walked over to him, his expression unreadable. "You'll tell me who hired them," he said. It wasn't a request. The old man sang. The name he gave was Lee Jae-hyun, Jin-woo's own cousin, his most trusted lieutenant. Betrayal by blood. The old wound, torn open anew. After he had the information he needed, Jin-woo looked at Nia. "What do we do with him?" he asked. The "we" was deliberate. He was making her a part of this decision. Nia looked at the terrified old man who had sold them out. Her father would have said there was only one way to deal with a snake. She had spent 5 years trying to be a different person, someone who believed in due process and second chances. That person felt like a stranger now. "He can't be allowed to talk to anyone else," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She had just condemned a man to death. She felt nothing. Or rather, she felt a cold clarity she hadn't felt in years. This was the world she was born into. She had only been pretending to live in another. Jin-woo nodded once. He dealt with Choi himself. Nia didn't watch. She didn't need to. When he returned, the room was silent except for the dripping of the leaky roof. The immediate danger was over, but a new, more permanent one had taken its place. "My world is not safe for you," he said, standing before her. "Your world found me, Mr. Kwon," she replied. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," he countered, his voice intense.
You chose to stay. You chose to make that call. Why?
This was it. The confession. Not of love, but of something more dangerous, more honest. "Because for 5 years, I've been pretending I'm someone I'm not," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tonight, I stopped pretending. Staying with you feels more honest than running away." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently cup her jaw, his thumbs stroking her cheek. His touch was electric. "I told myself keeping you close was a tactical necessity. I was lying to myself." His gaze dropped to her lips. The air crackled. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. And she knew she would not stop him. She had made her choice. She was no longer just the driver. She was a part of his war. The final confrontation was not in a warehouse or a back alley. It was in the gleaming, sterile lobby of Lee Jae-hyun's corporate headquarters. They walked in the front door, in broad daylight. Nia wore a simple, elegant black dress, her arm bandaged, her composure absolute. Jin-woo was in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, looking every bit the ruthless chairman he was. They looked like a power couple arriving for a meeting. Jae-hyun was waiting for them in his penthouse office, surrounded by his men. He looked surprised, but not scared. He thought he had all the power. "Cousin," Jae-hyun said with a smug smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure? And you brought your driver." Jin-woo ignored him. He looked at Nia. "The security panel is on the left wall. 30 seconds. Nia didn't question him. She walked calmly to the panel. She had spent the morning, not resting, but studying the blueprints of this building, blueprints Jin-woo had acquired with a single phone call. Her expertise in urban planning, in the flow and structure of buildings, was now a weapon. She typed in a sequence. It wasn't a code to open doors, but a command that initiated a full system lockdown and fire alarm. Chaos erupted. Sprinklers engaged. Alarms blared. Jae-hyun's men were momentarily disoriented. In that chaos, Jinwoo's own soldiers, who had entered the building disguised as maintenance and couriers, moved in. The fight was swift, brutal, and decisive. Nia didn't cower. She acted. She saw one of Jae-hyun's men aiming for Jinwoo's unprotected back. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy glass award from the desk and threw it with all her might, striking the man's arm. His shot went wide. Jinwoo turned, saw the threat, and neutralized it before turning his gaze back to her. There was no praise in his eyes, only a fierce, possessive acknowledgement. She had saved him. The debt was paid. When it was over, only Jae-hyun was left standing, a look of disbelief on his face. "You brought her into this," Jinwoo said, his voice dangerously quiet as he cornered his cousin. "That was your final mistake. A cost was paid. Blood was spilled on expensive carpets. An empire was secured." Later, as the city lights glittered below them from the office's panoramic window, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow ache.
Her old life was gone.
The grad student, the girl trying to escape her father's shadow, had died on that rainy road. Jinwoo came to stand behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his presence, a solid, unshakable force. "You are not my driver anymore, Nia," he said, saying her first name for the first time. The sound of it from his lips was a claim. "What am I, then?" she asked, her voice quiet. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm, proprietary. He looked at their reflections in the glass. The woman in the black dress and the man in the suit, silhouetted against the sprawling, merciless city they had just conquered. "You are the one who knows how to drive in the storm," he said. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a truth more binding than any vow.
He was right.
Her hands were on the wheel now, and she wasn't letting go. This was her road. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally going in the right direction.